So welcome to video 15. These ones go with the preservation and conservation notes. And first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about what preservation and conservation actually are, and how some of the different ways in which we can help with preservation and conservation in relation to setting up different special areas. So what are preservation and conservation? What is the difference? Well, preservation basically maintains areas that have not been affected by humanity yet, or at least to a limited effect. So you take, for instance, wildlife parks in Africa, where the human interaction with the animals is not allowed, where the rangers go around making sure that there is no hunting. These areas are part of preservation, where they're maintaining the state that they're naturally found in as best as can be. If you look at the old coal mines and how they have been filled in, how the natural environment and ecosystems are now returned as the grasses and trees and things have grown. That is an example of preservation, because they're trying to preserve it as its natural environment. Conservation, on the other hand, is the management of the environment so that any change is not wasteful or limits the damaging effect. So conservation doesn't say that change won't occur, it just looks at how to conserve the natural environment as much as we can do. A classic example of that is looking at sources of fuel. As you might know, fossil fuels such as oil, gas, coal, damage into the environment. So for preservation and conservation, we have to try and find alternative sources of fuel. Well, preservation would say, don't touch the area whatsoever, don't build anything on it, don't mine the area, because that would preserve the natural ecosystems. Whereas conservation would say, look, let's build maybe some wind turbines so that we can limit that amount of change and damage that's caused. Okay, it might affect the habitats a little bit, but it will help to conserve those environments and limit damage that's caused. So there are different special areas that we set aside for conservation and preservation. The example you can see is an example of a national park. It's the Brecon Beacons in the middle of Wales. The national parks are not necessarily, the public aren't prevented from entering these areas. You can go for walks or drive up to the Brecon Beacons, and there are car roads that run through there. But building and creating new roads now is prevented in these areas. So it helps to maintain the natural habitats that are found there and stops any special areas, rock formations, species from being damaged by human interaction. So it really limits the amount of damage to the ecosystems and habitats. Secondly, we have what we call a Site of Special Scientific Interest, or SSSI. These are a bit more different to national parks, because they don't necessarily mean a huge area like the Brecon Beacons. In this case, it could be a small lake or estuary, and it's not generally to maintain, the reason why it's there isn't to maintain the ecosystems that are there as a whole, but for some specific reason. So for instance, there might be a rare species of an insect there, or a fish. So by preventing human interaction there and limiting the amount of people that can go there, that makes sure that those fish are preserved. And it doesn't necessarily have to be to do with species. It could be some rock formations that are only found in that particular area, but it's limits or even prevents, as you can see from the sign, it prevents people from entering those areas. The last special area is what we call a nitrate sensitive zone, or a nitrate vulnerable zone. Now, before I mention what this is, just to mention what nitrates and the effect they have on the environment are. Basically, they're often found in they are found in fertilizers and manures, and they are what plants need to grow, to produce foliage. But one of the problems is that sometimes when water runs through soil, it washes some of those nitrates into the water. It's called leaching. In the water, algae, little green Protoctista, use those nitrates, and because there's suddenly a high amount of this nitrogen, these nitrates in the water, they flourish. Just like in the picture where you can see the river has got a green like scum across the surface. That's all the algae that are growing. Now the problem with this is that it cuts off light to the plants underneath. So any pondweeds, for example, will die underneath. Bacteria flourish on them as they break down the decaying matter and they use up the oxygen in the water. And as you can understand, oxygen is very important to the different organisms, and most things die. It's a process called eutrophication. Now, if nitrates are particularly high in an area, one way in which we can cut down on them is to limit the amount of nitrogens, or even prevent the amount of nitrogen fertilizers and manures that are used. So these areas are classified as what we call nitrate sensitive or nitrate vulnerable zones, and the amount of fertilizers or manures that can be used are either limited or prevented altogether. So have a look at these little statements and see if you can guess which area it's referring to. So firstly, this has more specific reasons for the protection. Public access to the area might be banned. And it may be used to protect a rare species. So see if you can think of which one of the three has these particular factors to it. Pause if you need more time. So that's the sites of special scientific interest. Specific reasons for protection. Public access can be banned to it, and they may be used, for example, to protect a rare species. Used to prevent algae bloom. Limits or prevents the use of fertilizers. And stops damage caused by high levels of nitrogen. So which one of those three areas have these factors to it? And again, you can pause if you need to think. That was the nitrate sensitive areas. Algae bloom is that flourish of algae that grows on the surface when there's high levels of nitrogen. So then finally, public still have access to the area. Building there is usually banned. The Brecon Beacons is an example in Wales. And this one is the national parks. So there you have it, the difference between conservation and preservation, and the special areas that we set aside in order to promote these preservation and conservation.